Hey everyone, I am currently in Germany and this is my 1996 Alpina B3 3.2 Touring. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of my car and also some general information about the Alpina E36 B3 3.2 liter cars. This color is Alpina Blue 2, but also labeled as Sapphire Blue Metallic. This car came with the gold Alpina decals along the side of the car. I think it contrasts very nicely with the blue. The interior has the Alpina cloth seats and door panels, and the car was optioned with an automatic transmission. This is car number 23 of 89 for the 3.2 liter Tourings. This car left the BMW factory as a 328i Touring. It was then shipped to Alpina in Buchloe to go through their completion process of building an Alpina car. There they install a new engine, transmission, along with other parts to make it an Alpina. This car actually has an Alpina VIN as opposed to a BMW VIN. Approximately 342 3.2 liter E36 cars were made, and of that only 89 of them were Tourings. I purchased this car recently in the Netherlands and it had about 157,000 kilometers on it, so that's just under 100,000 miles. The car was originally sold new in Japan, so it is a Japanese spec car. It was then imported to the Netherlands in 2019 by a collector who ended up also being a dealer because of all the cars he had. This collector owned quite a number of cool cars, and his warehouse facility was absolutely stunning with the number of cars and the memorabilia that it had. The engine is based on a BMW M52 2.8 liter. What Alpina did was quite extensive. They put in a Alpina specific crank, Alpina pistons, connecting rods from a US spec E36 M3's S52, also a Euro spec S50 oil filter housing, Alpina specific intake cams, a US spec S52 exhaust cam, an Alpina intake manifold that was cast, an Alpina intake system with a larger mass airflow sensor, as well as a full Alpina exhaust system. This engine ends up being much closer to a US spec E36 M3, the S52. With Alpina tuning, the power generated is actually greater than the US spec E36 M3 at 265 horsepower and 330 newton meters of torque. This is of course no match for the Euro E36 M3's high-revving S50 B32 engine, which produced 286 horsepower but only 320 newton meters of torque. This car's official 0 to 60 time is about 6 seconds, so it's not that far off from an M3 considering the added weight of the Touring body as well as the automatic transmission. The manual 3.2 liter cars get the GetDrag 6-speed transmission from the Euro E36 M3. This is pretty much the same transmission as the E46 M3, but with a different input shaft diameter, as well as slight differences in the casing due to the E46 sensor requirements and needs. The Alpina 3.0 liter cars get the GetDrag 5-speed, the same as the regular E36 325i. My car was optioned with the automatic 5-speed transmission. This is a unit from ZF, and this is the same transmission as the US spec E36 M3. However, I'm sure Alpina has done some internal tweaks since this specific part has an Alpina part number as opposed to a BMW part number. Switchtronic was also created by Alpina as a way to shift automatic transmissions, and shift buttons are actually installed on the steering wheel for one to be able to downshift or upshift the automatic transmission. The exhaust system is fully bespoke on the Alpina, from the headers all the way to the mufflers. My impression is that it provides more bass at lower RPMs compared to a US spec E36 M3. Otherwise, the exhaust note is very similar, which is to be expected given both are M52 based engines with similar specifications. It's not just the engine that makes an Alpina different from its BMW counterpart. A front splitter is added with the floating Alpina logo. This also makes the car much lower, so one really does have to be careful when driving over speed bumps or ramps. Alpina installed their own shocks and springs and left the rest of the suspension stock BMW. My car has Bilstein rear shocks since the original shocks were likely leaking at some point. I'll likely be swapped back to Alpina units if they're still available from the manufacturer. My car also has an X-brace, but I don't think Alpina installed it from the factory. It was probably installed by the original owner. On non-touring cars, an extended fuel tank was also an option from Alpina, but it does take up some trunk space. Alpina also fitted larger front brake calipers and larger rotors up front, so the front rotors end up being 326 millimeters over the stock 286 millimeters. The most striking feature on this car are the signature Alpina wheels with 20 spokes. This is a staggered 17-inch set. I believe these are called the softline wheels with the design. I'm not sure if this is true, but the story behind the wheel design was that with Alpina's racing experience, they found that the 5-spoke was the strongest design. However, in the 70s, cars had a 4 lug bolt design, which is not ideal to have uneven pressure against 4 lug bolts and 5 spokes. So to basically spread it out, they multiplied 5 and 4, and that's how they got 20 spokes. Another unique feature of the Alpina wheels starting in the 90s was the location of the valve stem. Notice there's no valve stem on the perimeter of the wheel, and instead the valve stem is actually in the center behind the lug bolt cover. For the air to get from the valve stem into the tire, one of the spokes is actually hollowed out. The interior is pretty familiar E36 fare, however, you can see there is Alpina cloth on the seats as well as door panels. The cloth has a green and blue stripe pattern, and the rest of the fabric also has a pattern that looks like steel plating. There's a numbered plaque in the car showing this is number 23. A lot of older Alpinas have a very scratched up plaque, so the finish does seem very delicate. Mine already has 2 scratches on it. The seats are manual, and they are pretty much the same as the BMW sport seats. Like all BMWs from this era, the bolster foam starts to break down. Luckily, BMW still sells the foam pads for the seats if I want to repair them. Alpina also offered the option of Recaro sports seats in the 90s, and they're extremely rare to come by. There's actually a set on eBay right now, but it's a little bit too much money to justify. The steering wheel appears to be a Euro M-Tech 3-spoke wrapped in leather with blue and green stitching. The story goes that the founder of Alpina didn't like cross-stitching because it was uncomfortable, so Alpina steering wheels are actually stitched differently from BMW steering wheels. The cross-stitching pattern actually appears to be underneath the leather, and the stitching that is parallel to the seam is visible with blue and green thread. Since this is an automatic car, the Switchtronic buttons were also added to the steering wheel. The center console is covered in wood veneer, but you can see here it's pretty old and delicate. It is starting to chip and fall apart. New wood consoles don't appear to be in stock or available anymore from BMW or Alpina. However, I was pretty lucky and found a new one on eBay, Germany, and immediately snatched it up. Alpina offered the option of adding a digital display by the instrument cluster. On the cluster, it has 4 readouts, one for oil temperature, oil pressure, differential temperature. On the automatic cars, it has a gear indicator for the Switchtronic, and for manual cars, it will have a voltage readout. You can see here, as I put the transmission into sport mode, which allows manual shifting, you can see the gear indicator now show up with a number. In the US market, the E36 never came in a station wagon variant, or Tourings as Europeans called them. On the E36 Touring, everything from the C-pillar forward is the same as a sedan. The rear bumper was also the same as a sedan. The rear hatch opens up nice and wide, and the rear seats actually fold down to create a very large cargo space. I always liked station wagons since they didn't weigh that much more than sedans, were more practical, and I think they look better than sedans. I only wish more European manufacturers would bring fast wagons to the US market. For those who don't know, on the E36 there's actually a printout from the BMW factory underneath the rear seat so you can see what option codes the chassis was built with. Here's a picture of my printout and the codes. And here is a lookup of those codes. It's interesting to see how BMW denoted specific codes for Alpina builds. What's also unusual about this car is the lack of rust. The car was well taken care of, and I don't think it was even driven in the rain when it was still in Japan. E36's rust at the rocker panels and wheel arches. I have yet to see another rust-free E36 in Europe. I actually looked at another Alpina B3 3.2 Touring in Nuremberg, Germany, and the car looked great at 6 feet away, but once up close, I could start to see signs of rust and rust repair. Once under the car, it was painfully obvious how bad it was, from rusty calipers, non-matching jack points, rusty suspension parts, and rusty panels. It's a shame since it was such a unique color combination and a highly spec'd out car. The only other B3 3.2 Touring for sale across all of Europe was in Switzerland, and I didn't get a chance to take a look at it. The car was repainted, interior reupholstered, the engine was replaced, and it was further away from hitting the 25-year mark for me to import it. The Alpina B3 3.2 wasn't the ultimate Alpina E36. That crown goes to the Alpina B8 4.6. Alpina crammed a highly modified M60 engine into the E36 chassis. The chassis had to be modified to accept the V8. It was tuned to 333 horsepower and 470 newton meters of torque, with a 0 to 60 time of 5.6 seconds for the Touring model. Only 27 Tourings were ever made worldwide, and all of them were 6-speed manual transmission cars. If any B8 4.6 Touring owners that are watching and are interested in selling their car, please reach out to me. During my search for an Alpina car, there were some things I observed with Japanese spec cars. They tended to be well taken care of, but also, very frequently, they will be repainted. My car was a little unusual since only the hood appears to have been repainted according to the paint depth meter readings. Japanese cars also tended to not have as many options selected compared to their European counterparts. There were a number of options on my car that was not selected, such as no leather, no hi-fi stereo system, no cruise control, no power seats, no heated seats, no park distance control system, no automatic air recirculation system, no auto dimming rearview mirror, no headlight washers, no onboard computer, and no cargo net. Other things I've noticed about a Japanese spec car include no third brake light. Apparently, Japanese code only requires one functional brake light to be road legal, so having two was their redundancy. Also, when the car is in reverse, it will chime at you. There's also supposed to be a speed limit chime and a toll system. However, on my car, they have been removed. I'm sure I'll discover other quirks of a Japanese spec car as I start to get to know this car better. This will be my third E36, so I'm really excited to get this car back to the US. I'm moving back to the US in a few weeks, but this car won't be 25 years old until May 2021. For those who aren't familiar, cars that are 25 years old are exempt from DOT and EPA requirements when they enter the country. Some local state rules may apply, so be sure to do your own research on what's needed if you're going to import a car to the US. I've made an arrangement with my shipping company to store the car for a few months before it gets loaded onto a ship. It'll be about 2,500 euros to store the car and then also to get the car to the US through a shipping container with insurance. From there, I'll need to pay a 2.5% import tariff and then go through any local state titling and registration process. As far as I can tell, this will be the first Alpina B3 3.2 Touring coming to the US. I think there's at least one other E36 Alpina Touring in Texas, however, it's only the 3.0 liter. There should be some B3 2.8 Tourings coming to the US over the next few months based on some chats online. My plan once the car arrives in the US is to rejuvenate the car a little bit, then use it. I'll be replacing all the fluids, filters, and any worn consumables. Paint correction and full detailing will also be in order. The car's fine, but it's nearly 25 years old now, so there are going to be some swirl marks that need to be removed. I mentioned that the car doesn't have a third brake light since it's a Japanese spec car. I found probably the last OE Touring third brake light retrofit kit from a dealer in Denmark. I've been in enough rear end accidents where I'm not going to skip out on this retrofit. I also have a wish list of things I'd like to do to the car, but it'll be done over time or as things break and need replacing. My aim is to keep the car in tip-top shape and only do really OE plus modifications to it. I don't think the car will ever be collectible, so I want to make it just right for me. The car doesn't have the hi-fi sound system, and I was able to find a fully intact hi-fi wiring harness for a Touring. I would install the OE amp and harness, then Bavarian Soundworks speakers. I've always liked their speaker setup since it's plug and play and look original. I also have a spare European BMW Indianapolis Pro head unit that I'd throw in there as well. I also found a fully intact rear parking distance control harness and system. That should be an easy retrofit since the harness just taps into the rear taillight power as a signal. I'll probably get to that if I ever need to remove the rear bumper. My front seats are okay for now, but eventually the foam will break down further and the fabric will need repairing. Luckily, there are companies that reproduce the fabric and BMW still sells the foam pads. While I have the seats apart, I might as well install the heated seat elements since I found an intact wiring harness for the heated seat system. The biggest thing would be an auto to manual swap. My original plan was to do the swap as soon as I got the car into the US, but after driving around in Europe in the car, the automatic just seems to make a lot of sense in the Alpina. Plus, I already have a 5-speed manual US spec E36 M3. Thanks everyone for watching and hope you found the information useful. I'm very excited about adding this car to my collection as the E36 is one of my favorite BMW platforms. I'm hoping to enjoy the car some more once it arrives in the US and hope it'll inspire other car enthusiasts to look at this unique brand and what it offers. Thanks again and see you on the road.